Case 1. Lori Vallow Daybell, September 2019, Fremont and Ada counties. In the early autumn of 2019, in the small college town of Rexburg, a mother's story about her missing children stopped adding up. Lori Vallow Daybell had, by that point in her life, built a following around an apocalyptic worldview shared with her fifth husband, Chad Daybell. Central to their belief system was the idea that a person's body could become possessed, turned into what they called a zombie, and that the only way to free that person's soul was to end the body that housed it. It was a doctrine that gave two people permission to look at their own family members and see obstacles instead of children. 7-year-old Joshua, J.J. Vallow, and 16-year-old Tylee Ryan were Lori's own children. Tylee was last seen alive on the 8th of September, 2019, following a family trip to Yellowstone National Park. J.J. disappeared from view 2 weeks later, on the 22nd of September. For months afterward, Lori told relatives and Rexburg police that the children were safe, living with family friends in Arizona. It was a lie she maintained, even as concerned family members flew across the country looking for answers, and even as she and Chad quietly left the state to marry in Hawaii. While the search for the children intensified, another death was being quietly re-examined. Chad Daybell's previous wife, 49-year-old Tammy Daybell, had died that October and been buried under a ruling of natural causes. But as investigators dug deeper into Chad and Lori's relationship, which had begun before Tammy's death, that ruling no longer sat right. In June of 2020, a search warrant executed on Chad Daybell's property in Fremont County uncovered what investigators had feared for 9 months. The remains of both children were found hidden on the property. Tylee's remains had been burned in a pet cemetery on the land. JJ's body had been wrapped and buried nearby. Tammy Daybell's body was exhumed soon after, and a new examination determined that her death had not been natural at all. She had been asphyxiated. Because of how much publicity the case had generated nationally, the trial was moved out of Fremont County to the Ada County Courthouse in Boise to help ensure an impartial jury. On the 12th of May 2023, the jury found Lori Vallow Daybell guilty on all counts, including 3 counts of first-degree murder and conspiracy. On the 31st of July 2023, she was sentenced to 3 consecutive terms of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice in this case came slowly, nearly 4 years after 2 children vanished from a mother who was supposed to protect them. But it came, and it came because investigators refused to accept a story that didn't hold together. If this case moved you, this is exactly why Cold Case Hour exists, to make sure these victims are remembered correctly. If you haven't subscribed yet, take 2 seconds to do that now so you don't miss the next case. And if you're finding value in what we do here, drop a like and leave a comment. We read every one. Case 2. Lori Eisenberg, February 13, 2018, Kootenai County. On a cold February morning on Lake Coeur d'Alene, a boat trip that was supposed to be a sunrise cruise became a staged accident. Lori Eisenberg was, by outward appearances, a respected figure in her community, working with the North Idaho Housing Coalition. But behind that reputation, she was embezzling more than $500,000 from her employer, and she knew that exposure was closing in. Her 68-year-old husband, Larry Eisenberg, was an obstacle both to that secret and to the life insurance and estate she stood to gain from his death. On the morning of the 13th of February 2018, Lori invited Larry onto their boat. Before they set out, she secretly laced his drink with a dangerously high dose of diphenhydramine, the sedating ingredient found in over-the-counter allergy medication. Once the drug incapacitated him, he ended up in the frigid lake water. Lori waited hours before contacting emergency dispatch, telling a story about Larry suffering a sudden medical episode while adjusting the boat's motor and falling overboard before she could reach him. It would be nearly 2 months before his body was recovered from the lake. When it was, the story collapsed under forensic scrutiny. Larry had not drowned. His blood contained a concentration of diphenhydramine far beyond any therapeutic amount, a level consistent with deliberate poisoning, not accident. Faced with that evidence, along with a digital trail investigators had built around her financial crimes, Lori Eisenberg avoided a first-degree murder trial by entering a blind Alford plea to second-degree murder on the 11th of February, 2021, in Kootenai County District Court. On the 24th of May, 2021, District Judge Scott Wayman sentenced her to life in prison, with a 30-year fixed minimum term before she can be considered for parole. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. Before we move to the next case, take just 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another documentary like this one. And if this story affected you, like the video and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Case 3. Melanie Smith, February 11, 2017, Bingham County. In the small rural community of Pingree, a home known to investigators as a gathering place for methamphetamine use became the scene of a killing that unfolded over hours, not seconds. On the night of the 10th of February, 2017, surveillance footage placed Melanie Dawn Smith and 30-year-old David Lee Davis at the Fort Hall Casino before the two returned to Smith's mobile home with a third person, Kevin Day. What happened next began as a dispute between Day and Davis. Day shot Davis in the legs with a small-caliber handgun and then fled the property, leaving Davis wounded but alive. Instead of calling for help, Melanie Smith made a decision that turned a violent altercation into a homicide. She retrieved a rifle and fatally shot Davis. Toxicology results later showed that Davis had significant levels of methamphetamine and hydrocodone in his system, but that fact did nothing to change what Smith did next. For 2 days, she kept his body inside the home, attempting to destroy evidence, including wrapping the remains in industrial plastic and using a wood-burning stove in an effort to dispose of them. The crime came to light only because another individual, Guy Lopez, visited the home, saw what had happened, and immediately contacted law enforcement. On the 25th of October, 2017, a jury at the Bingham County Courthouse convicted Melanie Smith of first-degree murder and felony destruction of evidence. District Judge Darren B. Simpson sentenced her to life in prison without parole for the murder, plus a consecutive 4-year term for tampering with evidence. If you're enjoying these stories, this is the moment to hit subscribe so you catch every future case we bring you. Don't forget to like this video too. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling these stories. Let us know in the comments which case has affected you most so far. Case 3. Melanie Smith, February 11, 2017, Bingham County. In the small rural community of Pingree, a home known to investigators as a gathering place for methamphetamine use became the scene of a killing that unfolded over hours, not seconds. On the night of the 10th of February, 2017, surveillance footage placed Melanie Dawn Smith and 30-year-old David Lee Davis at the Fort Hall Casino before the two returned to Smith's mobile home with a third person, Kevin Day. What happened next began as a dispute between Day and Davis. Day shot Davis in the legs with a small-caliber handgun and then fled the property, leaving Davis wounded but alive. Instead of calling for help, Melanie Smith made a decision that turned a violent altercation into a homicide. She retrieved a rifle and fatally shot Davis. Toxicology results later showed that Davis had significant levels of methamphetamine and hydrocodone in his system, but that fact did nothing to change what Smith did next. For 2 days, she kept his body inside the home, attempting to destroy evidence, including wrapping the remains in industrial plastic and using a wood-burning stove in an effort to dispose of them. The crime came to light only because another individual, Guy Lopez, visited the home, saw what had happened, and immediately contacted law enforcement. On the 25th of October, 2017, a jury at the Bingham County Courthouse convicted Melanie Smith of first-degree murder and felony destruction of evidence. District Judge Darren B. Simpson sentenced her to life in prison without parole for the murder, plus a consecutive 4-year term for tampering with evidence. If you're enjoying these stories, this is the moment to hit subscribe so you catch every future case we bring you. Don't forget to like this video too. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling these stories. Let us know in the comments which case has affected you most so far. Case 4. Sarah Pierce, June 15, 2000, Canyon County on Interstate 84 near Caldwell. A roadside ambush left one survivor with a story that would take nearly 2 years to be believed. Sarah Pierce, then 19 years old, was part of a group that would later become known publicly as the Garfield Street 11. On the 15th of June, 2000, the group forced a vehicle driven by Linda Lebrain off the highway using 2 of their own cars. Over the following hours, Lebrain was subjected to a brutal assault and multiple stab wounds, while her attackers searched her car for anything of value. Before leaving, the group set her vehicle on fire and left her on a steep roadside embankment. Remarkably, Linda Lebrain survived. She was found by passing motorists and rushed to medical care, but her case went unsolved for nearly 2 years until a broadcast of America's Most Wanted generated a tip that finally led investigators to the group responsible. In a video lineup, Lee Brain identified Sarah Pierce as the woman who had demanded drugs from her during the attack. In 2003, a Canyon County jury convicted Pierce on 6 felony counts, including aiding and abetting attempted first-degree murder, kidnapping, and robbery. In January of 2004, she was sentenced to life in prison with 15 years fixed. Years later, the Idaho Innocence Project raised questions about eyewitness identification in her case, and in 2014, a judge commuted her remaining sentence to probation, resulting in her release after more than 11 years served. Her underlying conviction, however, remains on record. Cases like this show just how long the road to justice can be, which is exactly why we do what we do here at Cold Case Hour. If you haven't already, subscribe so you're notified the moment we release the next case. And if this one surprised you, tell us why in the comments below. Case 5. Danielle Redoux, May 11, 2020, Ada County. In the city of Meridian, inside a quiet residential neighborhood on North Swainson Avenue, an ordinary Monday afternoon turned into the beginning of a case that would leave even the judge who sentenced it saying years later that he still didn't fully understand what had happened. Adam McKinney had stopped by the home he shared history with Danielle Redoux, the mother of his 2-month-old son, Dawson. It was the kind of small, unremarkable visit that happens in households with a new baby. A father coming by mid-morning to help out, to spend a few minutes with his son before heading back to work. Before he left, he fed Dawson and placed him back in his swing. By all accounts, in that moment, everything was normal. Danielle Redoux was alone with Dawson for only a matter of minutes after Adam returned to his job. Prosecutors would later tell the court that in that short window, around 6 minutes, everything changed. Redoux ran outside carrying her infant son, and witnesses described him as limp and unresponsive. Paramedics arrived and made the decision that would open the door to a 2-year legal battle. They called the police. At the hospital, doctors discovered that Dawson had suffered catastrophic injuries, a fractured skull and serious injury to his brain. He was placed on life support. But 4 days later, on May 15th, 2020, he did not survive. What made this case so difficult for investigators, for the court, and ultimately for Dawson's own father, was the shifting nature of Danielle Redoux's explanation for what had happened. In the hours and days after Dawson was hospitalized, she offered more than one version of events to police, first suggesting the baby had been choking while in his swing, and later pointing to the family dog as a possible cause. Neither explanation matched what doctors were finding in Dawson's body. Investigators arrested Redoux days after the initial incident on a charge of felony injury to a child. She was released on bail. Then, hours after Dawson died, officers returned and arrested her again, this time on a charge of first-degree murder. The case moved slowly through the Ada County court system, spanning more than 2 years. In April of 2022, Danielle Redoux entered what's known as an Alford plea to first-degree murder, a legal mechanism that allows a defendant to accept a conviction and its punishment while stopping short of admitting guilt in open court. It meant that legally the case would be resolved. But it also meant that many of the specific questions surrounding Dawson's final hours would never be fully answered in a courtroom. The sentencing hearing, held on July 22, 2022, lasted more than 7 hours. Roughly 20 family members and friends from both sides filled the Ada County courtroom. Adam McKinney addressed the court directly, describing holding his son as he took his last breath, and describing his own grief in equally devastating terms. Even 4th District Judge Patrick Miller, a father himself, acknowledged from the bench that the full truth of what happened that day remained unclear to him. But he was clear about what mattered most, that Redoux had never fully taken responsibility, and that the court needed to set a high standard for how the justice system responds when a child in someone's care does not survive. Prosecutors had asked for a sentence of life with 30 years fixed. Judge Miller ultimately sentenced Danielle Redoux to life in prison with eligibility for parole after 18 years, a term well above the 10-year minimum Idaho law allowed, but short of what the state had requested. As the sentence was read and she was taken into custody, Redoux was seen looking back toward her family in tears. For Adam McKinney, the sentencing didn't bring the clarity he had hoped for. He told reporters that because Redoux's story changed so many times, he still couldn't say with certainty what happened to his son in those final minutes. A wound that, in some ways, never fully closes. We've noticed that most of you watching haven't subscribed to Cold Case Hour yet. Before we move on to the next case, take just 2 seconds to make sure you're subscribed so you never miss another documentary like this one. If this story affected you, Don't forget to like this video and leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Case 6. Melissa Calumpit, July 12, 2024. Canyon County A campground, meant for quiet evenings by the Snake River, became the site of a killing that had been planned days in advance by someone the victim trusted enough to meet alone. 36-year-old Melissa Calumpit, together with her mother, Rosalie Morris, traveled from their home in Battle Mountain, Nevada, directly into Canyon County, Idaho, with a plan already in place to confront her estranged husband, 37-year-old Travis Calumpit. The two lured him to the remote Martin Landing campgrounds just west of Palmer. Once he arrived, Melissa Calumpit drew a firearm and shot him. In the aftermath, both women worked to cover their tracks, disposing of the weapon, discarding Travis's phone, and fleeing the scene. When Canyon County Sheriff's deputies first questioned Calumpit, she denied ever being at the campgrounds. As physical evidence mounted against her, her story shifted to a claim of self-defense. That defense fell apart when investigators recovered Travis's own vehicle and pulled footage from its dash camera. Footage that showed the encounter had been planned, not spontaneous, and that Travis had not been the aggressor. Faced with that recording, Calumpit waived her right to trial and pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. On the 19th of November, 2025, following victim impact statements from Travis's family, a Canyon County district judge sentenced her to life in prison with a fixed 27-year minimum before parole eligibility. If a case like this reminds you why accountability matters, that's exactly the spirit behind this channel. Subscribing takes 2 seconds and makes sure you never miss the next one. And a like or a comment goes a long way in helping us keep bringing these stories to light. Case 7. Monique Osuna, September 1st, 2020. Ada County. Some of the cases on this list are difficult to sit with, and this is one of them. We're including it not for shock value, but because the child at the center of this story deserves to be remembered, and because cases like his are part of why organizations like Child Help exist. Inside a home in Meridian, Idaho, 9-year-old Emric Osuna endured months of severe mistreatment at the hands of his stepmother, Monique Osuna, and his father, Eric Osuna. Emric was isolated from the outside world, forced into exhausting physical routines while malnourished, and struck repeatedly with household objects. Surveillance cameras had been installed throughout the home, not to protect Emric, but to monitor and enforce his punishment. On the 1st of September, 2020, Emric collapsed. When paramedics arrived, they found him unresponsive and severely underweight, with injuries covering his body. He died at the hospital shortly after. When investigators later reviewed the home's own surveillance footage, it documented, in Monique Osuna's own actions, the abuse Emric had endured, footage that would leave no room for doubt about what had happened inside that house. To avoid a capital trial, Osuna pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. On the 11th of February, 2022, 4th District Judge Stephen Hippler sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole, describing her conduct in the strongest possible terms from the bench. If you are a parent, teacher, neighbor, or friend who has ever had a concern about a child's safety, please don't wait to say something. The Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline is free, confidential, and available for exactly these kinds of concerns. Emric's story is hard to tell, but it matters that it's told correctly and remembered. If you want to support that mission, subscribe to Cold Case Hour and leave a comment letting us know your thoughts. We read all of them. Case 8. Sarah Marie Johnson, September 2nd, 2003. Ada County, originally Blaine County. In the quiet resort town of Bellevue, Idaho, a 16-year-old girl's frustration with her parents' rules ended in a double homicide that shocked the entire state. Sarah Marie Johnson's parents, Alan and Diane Johnson, had forbidden her from continuing a relationship with her 19-year-old boyfriend, Bruno Santos, and had threatened to report him to police. On the morning of the 2nd of September, 2003, Sarah retrieved a hunting rifle from the property's guest house and entered her parents' bedroom. She shot her mother as she slept, and then shot her father as he rose from the bed. Afterward, Johnson discarded the rifle and a bloodied robe in an outdoor trash bin and ran to a neighbor's home, claiming an intruder was responsible. Investigators quickly became suspicious of inconsistencies in her account. Forensic testing on the discarded robe linked it directly to her, and a latex glove recovered from the trash connected her to the weapon itself. Due to the intensity of pretrial publicity in Blaine County, the trial was relocated to the Ada County Courthouse in Boise. On the 16th of March, 2005, the jury convicted Johnson on 2 counts of first-degree murder. She received 2 concurrent life sentences without parole, along with an additional 15 years for a firearm enhancement. This case became one of the most talked about in Idaho's history, and if stories like this interest you, Cold Case Hour is where you'll find them first. Subscribe now and let us know in the comments what stood out to you about this one. Case 9. Catherine Stanfield. December 11, 2009, Ada County Catherine Stanfield ran an informal, unlicensed daycare out of her Boise home, a place parents trusted to care for their youngest children during the workday. On the afternoon of the 11th of December, 2009, Stanfield called emergency services, reporting that 2-year-old Wyatt Fessler, a child in her care, had suddenly collapsed. She told responding paramedics and police that she had briefly stepped into the kitchen when she heard a noise and returned to find that Wyatt had fallen down a carpeted staircase. He was rushed to intensive care, fell into a coma, and died 2 days later. A thorough forensic medical investigation involving pediatric pathologists and neurosurgeons found that Wyatt's injuries were not consistent with a fall down carpeted stairs. Instead, the evidence pointed to abusive head trauma, the kind caused by violent, forceful movement, not an accident. Stanfield was charged with first-degree murder by battery of a child. Following a lengthy, evidence-heavy trial at the Ada County Courthouse, a jury found her guilty. In June of 2012, 4th District Judge Thomas Neville sentenced her to life in prison with a 10-year fixed minimum before parole eligibility. Stanfield pursued years of appeals, including a review by the Idaho Supreme Court in 2019 regarding expert medical testimony presented at trial, a review that ultimately did not overturn her conviction. If you have young children in anyone else's care, cases like this are a hard but important reminder to trust your instincts. If this story mattered to you, subscribe to Cold Case Hour so you catch our next release, and share your thoughts in the comments. Case 10. Melissa Perkins, November 7, 2022, Bingham County. Just before midnight on a November evening in Blackfoot, Idaho, a 911 caller reported something urgent. A man's voice, screaming from inside an apartment complex, saying he had been stabbed. Officers with the Blackfoot Police Department arrived at an apartment complex on North Broadway Street to a scene that would stay with investigators for a long time afterward. They found 37-year-old Jace Williams collapsed near the top of a stairwell, suffering from what appeared to be 2 stab wounds to his back. Officers immediately began life-saving efforts as Blackfoot EMS arrived and took over emergency medical care, rushing Williams to Bingham Memorial Hospital. Despite those efforts, Williams did not survive his injuries and was pronounced dead at the hospital. What made this case especially difficult for investigators, and later for the prosecuting attorney who handled it, was that much of what happened that night wasn't left to speculation. It was recorded. Apartment surveillance footage captured the entire sequence of events. According to that footage and later police reports, Jace Williams appeared to have been lying down on his bed inside the apartment when he sustained the stab wounds to his back. Wounded and bleeding, he made his way out of the apartment and into the hallway, walking roughly 30 feet toward the stairwell. Along the way, he dropped the weapon involved over the stairwell railing. He sat down at the top of the stairs, calling out for help and knocking on the doors of neighbors, desperate for someone to hear him. The video shows that within about a minute of Williams reaching the hallway, 35-year-old Melissa K. Perkins, his partner who lived with him in the apartment, exited the same apartment. Investigators noted she was barefoot. Rather than going toward Williams or seeking help for him, surveillance footage showed her walking past him and leaving the building through a back exit. Police searched the apartment and found blood on the bed and on the window blinds, along with a blood-stained kitchen knife on the stairs outside. Reviewing the surveillance footage, investigators determined that Perkins and Williams were the only 2 people who had entered or exited the apartment that night. When officers located Perkins nearby, she declined to be interviewed without an attorney present. A physical examination conducted by officers noted what appeared to be blood on her thigh, though no marks or injuries consistent with a physical struggle were found on her body. Perkins was arrested and initially charged with second-degree murder, to which she first pleaded not guilty. The case drew significant regional attention, with local outlets extensively covering her court appearances, including a preliminary hearing in which prosecutors presented the surveillance footage and photographs from the scene to establish probable cause. On March 27, 2023, Perkins changed her plea, admitting guilt to second-degree murder in Bingham County District Court under a negotiated agreement. As part of that deal, Prosecutors agreed to recommend a minimum of 18 years fixed, while remaining free to argue for a longer indeterminate term. Her defense was permitted to argue for a fixed term as low as 5 years. On July 17, 2023, in a packed Bingham County courtroom, 7th District Judge Darren Simpson handed down his decision. He sentenced Melissa Perkins to a minimum of 24 years fixed, with a maximum indeterminate term of life in prison. During the hearing, prosecuting attorney Paul Rogers told the court that in his experience, he had never before handled a case where video footage captured a victim's final moments as he lay dying in a hallway, calling for help. He described the emotional toll the footage had taken on him personally and acknowledged that his own experience was nothing compared to what Williams's family had endured. Both of Jace Williams's parents spoke at the sentencing, describing the impact of losing their son in this way. If you're enjoying these stories, this is the moment to hit subscribe so you catch every future case we bring you. Don't forget to like this video too. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling these stories. Let us know in the comments which case has stayed with you the most. 10 cases, 10 different homes, 10 different counties, 10 women whose names are now permanently tied to court records in the state of Idaho. What connects them isn't a single motive or a single method. It's the fact that in every one of these stories, someone who was owed safety, trust or protection did not receive it. A husband on a boat, a stepson in his own home, 2 children who trusted their mother, a 2-month-old boy who couldn't speak for himself at all. It would be easy to look at 10 cases like this and walk away only with a sense of darkness. But that's not really what any of these cases are about, underneath the headlines. Every single one of them ended the same way ours did tonight, with an investigation that refused to accept a convenient story, with forensic evidence that spoke when victims no longer could, and with a courtroom where a judge, a jury, or a plea agreement ultimately held someone accountable. Laurie Vallow-Daybell's own lies unraveled under investigators who kept looking. Danielle Radu's shifting explanations couldn't survive what doctors found in Dawson's small body. Melissa Perkins' actions were caught, second by second, on a hallway camera she never knew was recording her. Justice in these cases didn't always come quickly. Some took months, some took years, one took more than a decade. But in every case it came. If anything in tonight's documentary hit close to home, whether it's concern about a child in your life or something happening in your own household, please don't carry that alone. The Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline is free, confidential and available at any hour, and reaching out is never an overreaction. That's the full list for tonight. If you made it this far, thank you for giving these 10 victims your time and your attention. That's really what remembering them means. If you haven't already, subscribe to Cold Case Hour so you're here for our next investigation. Drop a like if this documentary was worth your time, and leave a comment telling us which of these 10 cases stuck with you most. We read every one. This has been Cold Case Hour. We'll see you in the next case.